Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So last night, MPs overwhelmingly passed a government amendment calling on ministers to trigger Article 50 by the end of March next year. They also approved a Labour motion calling on ministers to publish a plan for leaving the EU before the exit negotiations begin. But what do we already know about what this plan might look like? Here's Joko with the details.
Yes, Andrew, MPs are asking Theresa May about her vision for Brexit. But there were some clues in her speech to the Conservative Party conference in October. The Prime Minister said leaving the European Union meant Britain would now be able to have control of immigration. She also said the UK laws should no longer be subject to the European Court of Justice. Both those statements were taken by some as a signal that the UK would not remain a member of the single market. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson also outlined a 4-point Brexit plan on the Andrew Marr Show last weekend. He said Brexit gave Britain the opportunity to take back control of our borders, our money, our laws, and to be able to do free trade deals. That fourth point on free trade could mean the UK will have to leave the customs union. Britain could still pay to get the best access to the single market, and the Brexit Secretary David Davis told MPs last week that the government was considering it. The final exit deal is also expected to be voted upon by the House of Commons after Mr Davis said it would be inconceivable for MPs not to have a vote. But will that be enough to satisfy MPs? And could the Supreme Court ask ministers to go further in how they spell out the specifics of their exit plan? Well, there were many MPs calling for the government to provide more detail during the debate in Parliament yesterday, and here's a flavour.
And I put the government on notice that if it fails to produce a plan by the time we are debating Article 50 legislation, if we are, assuming the government doesn't win, amendments from this side and possibly from the other side of the House will be put forward, setting out the minimum requirements of a plan. In other words, we're not going to have a situation where the government seeks a vote in a vacuum or produces a late, vague plan.
This is a negotiation. It's not a policy statement, and therefore where we're aiming for, and I think we may be on the same page on this, where we're aiming for may not be the exact place we end up at, and I think he would understand that.
But to say that it might consist of hints, I would merely remind the House that when Moses came down from the mountain bearing the tablets, it did not contain the 10 hints. He was pretty clear. He was pretty clear about what he was telling people what to do.
Once again, the Labour front bench sides with the supranational elites. They're out to try to frustrate and overturn the way people voted in June. Parliamentary sovereignty, Mr. Speaker, is shorthand for the sovereignty of the people. The verdict of the people on June the 23rd was absolutely clear. It would be perverse to invoke parliamentary oversight and sovereignty as a pretext for dither and delay.
Now, they've promised to publish a plan, but it's been quite clear to me from the government statements, from statements of Conservative MPs outside this chamber in the last 24 hours, that that plan will not be the white paper that the Brexit Secretary once promised. It will not answer the big questions about our vital access to the single market, the rights of UK citizens abroad and EU citizens here, or issues such as tariffs.
Now, to me, nothing could be clearer than what the government's position is. We've said this millions, we've said this a number of times. They find it very amusing. I'm glad to see that they find clarity amusing, because I think they would benefit from some clarity. But our position on the government's side is very simple. We want to have some restriction on freedom of movement. We want to change in those arrangements while having the widest possible access to the single market. Those are two very simple principles. I see various members of the front bench chuntering in their positions, but even they should be able to understand this basic position.
Joining me now, Labour MP Stephen Kinnock and the Conservative MP Bernard Jenkin. Welcome to you both. Bernard Jenkin, Ian Duncan-Smith, your colleague, fellow Brexiteer, said last night's vote was, quote, historic. Why?
Well, it was a bit of a watershed, wasn't it?
You tell me.
By a majority of hundreds, the House of Commons voted to invoke Article 50 by the 31st of March.
A non-binding opposition day motion that doesn't technically force the government to do anything.
Correct.
That's historic.
But it was an expression of opinion of the House of Commons that would have been unthinkable before the referendum. And there you have it.
What did Labour achieve?
It was the House of Commons accepting the referendum.
What did Labour achieve yesterday?
I think we finally got the government to confirm that it will produce and publish a plan. That will give us something to scrutinise.
Do you have any idea what this plan will look like?
It sounds to me like they want a hard Brexit. I think we're heading...
But what I meant was the nature of the plan. You know, will it be a white paper, a green paper, back of a fag packet sent over to you? I mean, you gave in, if I can put it that way, without getting any details on what the plan would be.
I think it should be a white paper, and I think we need to push hard for that now. We need to see the details. Let's not have a childish reaction from the government where they bring forward a 2-line bill on the 30th of March and expect to just railroad that through. Let's have a bit of respect, have a constructive, mature debate based on a detailed plan, please.
What do you think the government will do?
I think the government is likely to produce a white paper. It is likely to be the government's opening offer, the shape or the outline of the government's opening offer.
For the negotiations?
For the negotiations.
And that would that white paper then be translated into legislation?
Well, no, that white paper would be the opening position for the negotiation of the withdrawal agreement.
And the Commons would vote on the white paper?
If the House of Commons wanted to vote on the white paper, it could vote on the white paper.
Would that be enough, Stephen Kinnock?
Yes, and I think if the plan's not good enough, they'll have to come back with a better one.
It could be, of course, that the Supreme Court might rule that you actually need legislation to do this, that a motion in Parliament, even for a white paper, doesn't change the law. Now, I don't know if that's how they're going to rule, but it's certainly been a strong argument put by David Panic on the side of the plaintiffs. If they did that, a white paper alone and a motion would not be enough.
No, then we'd need to have a bill as well, and
What's
that would have to be
your view
discussed
on
on
this,
that basis.
Well, while this is all going on, I mean, anybody studying A-level or undergraduate politics should be watching the Supreme Court live hearing, because you are getting an almost kind of English Civil War Putney debate style enunciation of the British Constitution for the first time by people who actually know about it. And I think that, as you say, Andrew, we may end up with much more Constitution than we thought we had. But the critical problem for as it were, soft Brexiteers like me, I want the softest possible Brexit. I think we have to do Brexit, but I want to stay in the single market. I want very minimal changes to freedom of movement. If it's not that, and if the Europeans at the end of this 2 years give us a very tough deal, what do you do? And I think that people on the Labour benches and the rebels in the side of the Conservatives have to be prepared to say, we vote it down.
All right, we'll come to that in a minute. Let's get to the white paper first. Do you think there would have to be legislation to enact the white paper?
No, I think the white paper is purely... I think we're muddling up two things here. We may or may not have to have legislation to invoke Article 50. The negotiation will result in an agreement. Now, the agreement may or may not require legislation, but the negotiating position could not be justiciable unless there is some mad amendment put into the Article 50 bill that says the government must achieve this, and that would make the negotiation justiciable. That would be absolutely crazy. I mean,
I assume that that's what Labour would like to do. If the government laid out its negotiating position, its broad strategic position, in an act of Parliament.
No, that would be absolutely crazy.
You would want to amend it.
I think I mean, we can't do the crystal ball gazing here. If they come forward with a plan and a piece of legislation which is clearly not in the national interest, then we have to go to them and say, you've got to come back with a better one. But the key thing here is not connecting it to not triggering Article 50. We need to hold the government to account, but not to ransom.
I mean, would you, because I'm trying to seek clarity here, would you be happy with a white paper that is, it probably wouldn't be that long, but it would outline the strategic aims of the government, and then a short, almost like a 3-line act of Parliament that simply says we now vote to trigger Article 50 and begin negotiations as laid out in government white paper, whatever?
Well, what the government has promised is a vote at the end of the Article 50 process. So I think that that's the key, because this is such a dynamic
You mean
process.
on the deal?
We keep
Yes.
trying to shoot a
deal?
moving target. Yes, David Davis said yesterday he thinks it's inconceivable that there wouldn't be a vote at the end of the 2-year period.
You
And
probably
so-
said it was inconceivable that Donald Trump would win.
Can I just clear something
I'm not
up?
a betting man.
But if it's-
I'll
What's
leave
your
that to
view,
you.
Bernard Jenkins?
The bill won't mention the white paper. The negotiation will not be made justiciable in law. That would be absolutely crazy. Our system works, back to the Constitution. The government proposes, Parliament disposes. Now, if Parliament dislikes the way the government's negotiating in the European Union, ultimately, Parliament can sack the government. And it would become an issue of confidence. And I'm quite certain that we would win on any issue.
At the end of this process, though, what would happen if we have a vote on... So 2 years has gone and we have a deal. Some people will like it, some people won't. If the Commons then voted... If it votes for the deal, off we go. But if it votes against the deal, it's not a vote for a better deal. It's not even a vote to stay or leave. It's just a vote for no deal.
I think that you would then see. I mean, these are all hypotheticals, but I think this is probably it's more possible than not, actually, because it takes two to tango, and the Europeans are in no mood to give us anything other than a very hard, clear Brexit.
That might suit the government.
It might, but it might even not suit them, because they know that they need to be selling to British industry this transitional deal of, Nissan gets a piece of the action, the insurance industry gets equivalence. They can't have that as well. I doubt even this fairly Eurosceptic Tory government would accept something that was a straightforward break.
Do you have a clear idea in your mind of what the broad strategic aim should be of Brexit?
Well, I can give you my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I asked
I
for.
don't have any inside knowledge. I think the government is likely to make a very broad offer, a 0-0 offer on tariffs, and an offer to translate all the regulatory arrangements that provide services trade into a system of mutual recognition. And it's in everybody's interest to do that, because that will maximise the jobs on the continent and the jobs in the United Kingdom. But I think the alternative is, particularly on tariffs, if they don't want to do a 0-0 offer, then we will go to WTO tariffs. And we would raise a very great deal of money from tariffs on EU imports into this country.
Which you couldn't spend
we
on
could
the
spend
businesses.
on business, lowering business taxation, improving incentives
You
for
couldn't
investment.
spend directly on the
No,
businesses.
you couldn't subsidise.
Right.
But all
let me
this
ask
can
you
I just make
this.
just one other thing point? There's always talk about paying for access to the single market. If they want us to make us pay for access to the single market, well, they're called tariffs, and we just pay the tariffs.
Okay, I didn't
And we
ask you
charge
about
the
that, though.
tariffs on their imports
It's
to
another
us.
issue. But what I wanted, where does this leave the Supreme Court now? Justice Neuberger, the top judge on the Supreme Court, did say, I'm not saying it's his view, in fact, I suspect it isn't, but he did say people will wonder if Parliament has voted for Brexit, as it did last night, by such a huge amount, what's the point of the Supreme Court? But the answer...
Well,
perhaps, is
I think
that the court may still insist that there has to be legislation.
The court could still insist there has to be legislation, but I think we're beginning to see that this whole action has been rather OTOs.
OTOs?
Gosh, there's a word you don't hear very
Is
often.
that an American elevator?
Just going to look that up.
No, that's Otis.
i.e. unnecessary and time wasting. The importance of having a final judgment from the Supreme Court, they've got to get themselves out of a rather sticky spot they've got themselves into, because actually the courts don't like to interfere in Parliament.
No, all right.
But we're in a rather odd situation where
But then why
we're
is
waiting
the
for a
government
judgment.
spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money on this
Well, we
OTOs
didn't
process?
bring the court action.
Because
but
it's
I
been
also think
great for
we didn't
lawyers.
bring the court action.
On that other point you raised about the process, and
Just briefly, because we need to move
it's
on.
vital that we have a transitional arrangement as part of the withdrawal agreement. We're not going to get the full deal done
All right.
within Article 50
I'm going to
process.
stop.
And that, I think,
I'm
is a
gonna
red line.
Stop you there, because we will definitely be back on this.
Absolutely.
And all
More
these
than
issues.
once.
Thank you both.
Thank you.